it worked already. We're live right now. Um, as you may notice, this is commencement day at my university, so I that's why I'm in the fancy duds. Although I think I should take this stupid hat off. Why did people think these were comfortable or useful to wear? I don't know. But anyway, so what we're going to talk about today is uh, this is suggested by Marcus that we talk about things we didn't know that when we found out they blew our minds. So, or something along those lines. So we'll just start off with Great American Satan over there, and tell us what wonderful thing you didn't know that suddenly surprised you.
When I think of the phrase blew my mind, I just think about that song, that Spill the Wine, Take That for Old song, remember that shit? It's like there's this part where he says he had a dream, he was the star of a Hollywood movie, and he's like, this really blew my mind. The fact that me, an overfed, long-haired, leaping gnome, would be the star of a Hollywood movie. Anyway, that's just the thing that blow my mind makes me think of. Um, So I've gotten to a stage in life where I'm pretty unexcited about most things, which not really rising to the level of anhedonia, but there's definitely a moment in your youth when things are still able to be a little bit more novel, a little bit more engaging. For most people, probably that fades pretty hard. And that's why you end up being like tending to be really identify with the music from when you were young. So I've got a little bit of that kind of thing going on. I can't when the subject was proposed, I don't think I really could think of anything that would really say blew my mind per se. But I was thinking in terms of something that at least mildly surprised me recently. I probably shouldn't have, but did, was I started following this Tumblr on the social media on Tumblr. That was like it was herpsandbirds.tumblr.com. And there are thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of species of birds. There was no way I was going to be familiar with all of them, but you get the broad strokes from movies and TV and stuff like that, right? Oh, here's toucans, here's parrots, here's like a couple of different types of parrot and so on, right? You get to feeling like I'm roughly familiar with the animals that exist in the world. But there are some birds that kind of surprised me. I think particularly when the one I think about the most are the ones that are where there were a lot more diversity to a given type of bird than I thought there was, or imagined there was, and also entire groups of birds that I didn't really know anything about that I'm just finding, seeing pictures of for the first time recently. So the type of bird that has more diversity than I would have ever expected is toucans, right? We get here's Sam with got to follow his nose. He just get you to the Fruit Loops. Here's like your standard zoo animal kind of toucan, right? There are toucanettes, which are mini toucans, and there are a bunch of different species of toucan. I don't really know all many of them. I don't remember all the names and stuff, but they got different colors on them and stuff like that. But they still got that big toucan beak. And I had no idea that there was multiple types of toucan.
Me?
Um, yeah. And then the other one, the one that I'd never seen before, that's a group of birds that I'd never really seen before. Maybe I'd seen a picture of them over once in a blue moon. This is a group, but I don't never really stuck with me until now. I'm seeing more variety to them sometimes. Is turacos. Turacos are a group of birds that are mostly from Africa, and they look like a cartoon bird. They don't look like a real bird, like at all. They've got a rather unusually large eye that's relatively dark, so it's just a big dot on the side of their head. They've got cartoon colors, and they just look fake. They just look mad fake. And there's several species of them. They're all like crazy bright, colorful, big beady eyeball, little tiny bird beak. They just look like hey kid, get your crayons, draw a bird. It's a turaco. So that's things that were a little bit mind blowing for me recently.
They're probably CIA birds.
Could be spooks.
undercover.
Okay, I had to look them up because oh, what is this?
Like the
I gotta
scientific name for their clades like musophagenes.
Yeah, I found a bunch of them and I was on this site with all these bird pictures on it, and suddenly I get a message that the blog has been removed. Maybe it was CIA stuff.
See,
Gone a tick.
ooh,
Oh,
there's there's
yeah.
some there's some guy out who's trained an AI image generator to turn children's pictures into hypothetical animals and then
Oh,
animate
yeah. I've seen
it.
that.
Disgusting and weird.
Uh, Let me just allow here. I will share. No, not the desktop, just this. That'll do it. So there's a Tarako.
Ooh, that does look fake.
Yeah, totally fake. Yeah, I think this is something put up by the CIA to fool us all. Okay, very cute. Okay, who wants to go next? Marcus?
Yeah, I'll go.
Okay.
The first one, I have trouble sleeping these days, and I didn't sleep for 2 days because my mind was just so completely blown about it, which was the YouTube algorithm just offered me because I watch Milo, what's his name, the archaeologist's
Oh
channel.
yeah, yeah, I
He's
know that.
Mini Minuteman Milo. I can't
Uh-huh.
remember. So he was the guy who got me interested in Göbekli Tepe a couple of years ago.
Uh-huh.
But because I watch him, something brought in Lee Berger's talk about Homo naledi, which is the one where he announced it. And I don't feel like I should kind of spoiler this because actually the way that he presents it is incredibly mind blowing, also. So I won't spoiler it, but anybody who's interested, you can look for on YouTube for new discoveries in human origins, and you want the GLEX Ignition Conference where he spoke in 2024. And just to give you a brief idea about what's going on with Homo naledi, is that he talked through the story of how he was involved in finding pieces of Australopithecus, which is a big deal if you're a paleoanthropologist. Um, and then he decided to explore further into the cave complex where they found some pieces of Australopithecus. And apparently, he talked his 15-year-old kid into going back into this cave, which has these really dangerous, tiny little passages and stuff like that,
That's what
which, you know,
children are for. Yeah.
exactly. I mean, at least he wasn't doing, cloning and medical experiments on them. But, the kid comes back with they come back with a photograph of a fossil in this incredibly difficult part of the cave to access. And from there on out, the rest of the story is his dawning realization that they've found a new species of human, which is freaking amazing. And there's all kinds of and then there was this, and then there was that. And that's really fascinating to me. And I've never been to any of the conferences, but I just picture these paleoanthropologists fighting in the halls by the coffee machine about whether or not you know, this is a burial or not. Because burials apparently are the big distinct thing that paleoanthropologists have decided differentiates humans from, cats that bury their turds in the litter box. Probably not the best way to put it, but so that was completely mind blowing. I literally did not sleep for 2 days because I just sat there and watched everything that I could watch on YouTube until it started to get repetitive, and then I stopped.
Yeah,
And
and naledi is such a weird hominid. It's so relatively recent and it's so tiny and small brained and that's what I found kind of mind blowing about that species is Oh, how many other species have been lurking around in the quiet corners of the planet?
Well, I mean, that's it. It's like cockroaches. If you find one in your kitchen, then you have cockroaches. And if you find one new species of human in the back of a cave, I'm ready to assume that if you search every cave
Yeah.
system, you'll find Nazi U-boats or whatever, but you'll find something in there because
Uh, I was blown. I had my mind blown by the amount of ants that you really have if you see one of them recently. What's amazing for those is that so yeah, I just basically, and it's usually when I'm sitting on the john and did downstairs, I look out in the hall, see one ant, I'm all like, okay, we have 10,000. So you get these little piece of cardboard, you mix up some peanut butter and borax, and you put it on the piece of cardboard, and you just sit it on the ground, and they destroy themselves with chemical warfare. It's incredibly effective. But it's just the meantime when you're watching that happen like this, just like, oh my God, where'd all these motherfuckers come from? Just it's disgusting.
Yeah.
I remember
Yeah.
reading someplace that like 16% of the biomass on Earth is ant. Is that true?
Oh shoot,
Could be.
I actually do know about that one. It came up on a podcast that I follow a little while ago. It was actually, I think, E.O. Wilson who came up with the original claim of it. And I know E.O. Wilson's original claim about it actually, I think, was proved to be false, but I forget exactly what the exact numbers were. It's something like, I think his original claim was something like 10 ants for every human or something. I don't know. Or more
Yeah.
biomass of ants than human beings, something like that.
There was a ants are secondarily flightless wasps.
Yes.
Flight. Yep.
Is that's yeah. Which is, by the way, my favorite argument for why space aliens are not visiting Earth. Because imagine what would happen if you landed to go anal probe some people in West Central Pennsylvania and a couple of ants got on your spaceship. Um,
Yeah.
you know, they would resex themselves and start reproducing and doing all the crazy things that ants do, and you can't negotiate with them. And you can't get rid of them. I guess you could probably blow your spaceship up, but um,
Uh-huh.
so the other super amazing thing that blew my mind when I heard about it, and I apparently it's not super duper groundbreaking, but I just thought it was a perfect example of a natural science experiment. And if you search for TWIV, the week in this week in virology episode number 1207, they talk about it. And what happened was that Wales back in the 30s started giving people an anti-herpes vaccine. It was really shingles, but it's kind of the same thing. So it kind of worked a little bit on both. But so they started giving people this vaccine, kind of like Wednesday on this particular day. We're going to give all the kids this vaccine, and then any future kids are going to get this vaccine, and none of the past kids are going to get the vaccine unless unless they actually asked for it. And then they tracked all this stuff, and then some bunch of data analysts realized that they had a perfect natural experiment on large human populations, which of course, we always say that would be an unethical thing to do, to give two different vaccines to large human populations, but the Welsh did that accidentally. And then they also keep all kinds of detailed illness and mortality statistics. So they said, well, what can we do with this? And they started looking at it, and they discovered that having the vaccine resulted in a dramatic drop. I think the number was 25% or something like that in the onset of dementia, which, mind blown. Again, I was walking around going, how many other natural experiments like this are there? We we can't do those in the U.S., of course, because you'd have to, And then there's Texas, which does things differently. But any place where you've got a small controllable population where you can inject your nanorobotic 5G sensors in them, then you can do all kinds of great stuff.
I thought saw something of in terms of questionably ethical science. recently. And I don't think any of the actual scientists that were involved were doing anything particularly wrong. They were actually doing something pretty cool. But the person that this guy did something ridiculous to himself, and that ended up becoming the basis for some really really good thing. He was like a reptile collector that decided to slowly build himself an immunity to every snake venom, and he like almost died in the process of doing this repeatedly. But he's like just basically microdosing himself with different kinds of snake venoms. So he built up this like all these like crazy resistances, and then recently scientists use that to synthesize an anti-venom that's effective against multiple snake venoms, which is like usually you have to have like one for each type of snake, more or less.
Was,
Uh-huh.
wasn't it Mithridates of Pontus who did that?
I
Exposed
it,
him?
Oh, yeah.
the name sounds familiar. Maybe it might have been. I don't know.
I doubt they had the technology to do any extractions and
No,
synthesize new
I
anti-venom
think the guy's
outtakes,
name was
but
Dita or something like that.
yeah.
He's just this weird, wacky dude. But the scientists are, yeah. So anyway, never mind.
Yeah. I just had a student who was doing some research, on her own for a big term paper. And what she was focused on was um, she's interested in dentistry someday, of all things. And she was looking into these caries infections, and there's a connection between dental work and also dementia. So the idea is that maybe some of these viral particles are making their way to the brain because turns out there's a nice easy route from the gums up into the brain. Or it could be that it's part of the immune response is it's being trained by this exposure to uh, cavities in the mouth to then attack cells and tissues in the brain. But the numbers were really obvious. There's a huge connection between dental caries and um, Alzheimer's disease. So brush your teeth, everyone. Don't let it slide.
And since we're on that topic, we need to realize, but we don't really understand that dementia and Alzheimer's and they're a whole cluster of different things that go wrong in different ways. And so it's going to be like cancer. There won't be a single magical bullet that will solve dementia. It appears that some dementias are, your blood pressure's too high and your veins in your brain are too thin and blood perfuses through and you start losing cells.
Yeah.
Crazy stuff.
And there's just a million different factors out there. There's all kinds of viral agents, there's all kinds of chemical agents that we're swimming in right now. And who knows what they are affecting, but it could be a cumulative effect. It could be, little nudges to make your brain break down at an earlier and earlier age. And it's leading to all these difficulties. And it's also like things like autism. Nobody knows what causes autism. It's this huge spectrum of various consequences, and we don't know why it sorts out the way it does. So, yeah,
There, there won't be just one cause for autism. Do you think
no,
it's gonna yeah, it's gonna be developmental. It's gonna be behavioral. It's gonna be you know. I mean, I grew up in Baltimore, so I would have assumed that any kid who grew up funny was just eating lead paint.
right? Yeah,
That's how we did that. So those were my super cool things.
okay. Those are super cool things. I agree about Homo naledi. That's been a really interesting story. I do think though that Berger has oversold some elements of the story.
Yes.
I don't know if I believe his story about finding fire pits or the stuff about art carved on the walls but still it's a really interesting species and it's very exotic, very weird. We need to know more about it.
So with late surviving seemingly primitive species like Homo floresiensis, the so-called hobbit, like they've got some cognitive abilities that are left to like kind of get by, like do some of the same things that we do, whether or not they would have been smart enough to originate those things themselves. If they're late surviving, they could have stolen that technology from us, which kind of like, I don't know, raises the funny idea of like what kind of technologies, what other kind of species might just kind of like mimic human use of technology
Right.
and like jack some kind of trick from us. But
Yeah.
Homo floresiensis was like uniformly microcephalic in a way that like had people thinking, oh, is this just a population that of Homo erectus that had like degenerated by inbreeding or whatever and gotten like they were all like small brains pathologically, and like more further analysis has shown no, this is like consistently how this species is. This is a different species. I'm pretty sure they had fire and tools, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but that's another point is we don't know what the substrate for intelligence is. It's your brain. Sure, it's your brain, but it's not as simple as big brain equals big smartness. It's just this weird correlation there. And we look at other animals and um, various birds are incredibly intelligent with the most tiny brains imaginable. It's like this little peanut stuck in their head, and yet they can do all the, like what's the bird? I'm thinking of the
New Caledonian
jays,
crow.
Steller's jays and crows and all those kinds of things.
Corvids.
The one that
Yeah,
did the most that impressed people the most with its tool use in scientific studies was the New Caledonian crow. But
right.
a lot of other crows have been shown to have like different levels of tool making ability and parrots and stuff like that. There's the somebody I heard one zoologist saying that the intelligence displayed by parrots is comparable to like primates and like monkeys and such. Uh,
Yes.
there was I'm just in terms of like what's really cool to me is that you can just literally go out and see this depending on where you live. In the Pacific Northwest, I've seen at least twice. I've seen a crow basically making use of a tool, and that I'd never really noticed before. And it's just like get a strong enough stick, yeah, about yay long, pinch it in your beak. You've got like a woodpecker beak suddenly that you didn't have
Hmm.
before. Poke in the ground, get bugs. I've just seen that twice now. It's just like I'm like, whoa, hey, look at that. Tricks.
So
And
when I
how much
was
of intelligence is due to your brain, and how much of it is due to the fact that we get these things? That having good manipulative appendages kind of synergizes with intelligence.
I'd like to see a crow try to play guitar with his beak.
Well, when I was filling my head with naledi stuff, at one point I drifted out and started to fall asleep. And I don't know if you've ever had that where the media that you're taking in starts to become part of your dream and gets extremely weird. And I was dreaming that somebody was talking about that the reason that nobody were able to function just fine with these smaller brains was because they lived in the moment. They were kind of they
Oh, right.
didn't try to remember things. They just simply knew enough to be a naledi, and they would learn that, and that they didn't. They just kind of shed information. And if you think about it that way, you could get a lot done with a very small brain.
Cats, I think, function this way. You really
Yeah.
get to know if you like have like just one or two pets and you like really get to know them very well. It's kind of interesting to see what's going on in their mind, and it really is absolutely fucking moment to moment. They do have a circadian rhythm. They can kind of sync to certain events, so they'll get an idea, feeling like this is time for this sort of thing to happen, but which looks like memory, but I think it's something some other kind of feature of cognition. But like they're otherwise they're just like, well, why is he doing this now? What is this? And it's just like it's just what he feels like doing right now, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, horses will remember things really well, even if they're stupid things to remember. Like, I saw a butterfly once, so now every time I see a butterfly, I'm going to run like hell.
I seen a dog like I seen them form this permanent memory one time, and I didn't even know you wouldn't even know it was happening. It was just a nothing of an event. Uh, Toy is being thrown around the living room, so he runs and grabs it, brings it back. Toy ends up on top of this like tall piece of furniture. You get it down, you like play with him again. for the rest of his natural life, he would like look up at the top of that piece of furniture thinking, I wonder if the toy's up there now.
Uh-huh. And then there's supernatural behavior in pigeons where
Yep.
they can fixate on just some random event that happens at the same time as something they want. And then they think that that event is somehow causative for the event and not just a random correlation, but it actually somehow manipulates the world to make,
Magic.
yes.
Ever
They
since the Industrial Revolution, that's why conservatives keep thinking that trickle-down economics is going to work. It was going really well for everybody, but they keep going, well, if we make our rich even richer, then we'll all do very well.
And the rich want us to think that. Yeah.
Coincidentally.
Yeah.
Oh man, yeah.
Yeah. So,
Ironic enough, I got one on pigeons actually. One
oh,
the anecdote I brought up, and I should probably double check it to make sure it's accurate. But apparently, pigeons are actually better at human beings in some tasks. The one that I'm thinking of in particular is sort of the equivalent of like a Skinner box. I.e., you take a box of something, put the bird in it, and then you give them two little things to sort of peck. One color, one another color, and all that. And then you sort of say, okay, we want you to, we're going to reward you if you peck on the right one, for instance. And, you just sort of flash them up randomly and all that, get the bird kind of used to it. And then actually what they would do is they would actually vary the probabilities of each of these ones blinking. So it was like 60% on one side and 40% on the other side. If you show that to a human being and do that, what human beings typically tend to do is they sort of assess, okay, one of these seems to be more likely than the other. And so they'll actually sort of start preferentially tapping on the one they think is more likely, but they'll actually mix it up with both. Okay, this one's more likely, so I'm going to tap it more, but I'll also occasionally tap the other side. With pigeons, once they sort of realize that the button they choose is preferential, they always pick the one that's the most common. And in fact, if you look at it mathematically, that is in fact the optimal solution. You always go for the button which is the most frequent, because then in the long run you're actually going to get the treat a lot more often. Yeah, kind of fascinating.
oh, yeah. It is wasted effort then to peck on the one that's got the low probability. So that kind of makes sense.
pigeons. I heard that they taught them to tell the difference between two different art styles. It's like Cubism and Impressionism, I think. And that's a pretty fun one. Which actually makes me think about something that is kind of mind-blowing recently, that I had totally forgotten to mention. Probably the thing that blew my mind the most in recent years is AI art. Which, I'm not gonna like get into the controversy on this here, but it's still like, who would have ever imagined that it would be possible to have something? Let's just like, grant the argument that like, oh, it's just like stealing stuff and mishmashing it and pastiche and blah blah whatever. Even so, who would have ever who of anybody who's ever painstakingly worked on a file in Photoshop for like 5,000 hours to make like Obama look like he's like doing bad stuff to kittens or whatever, who has any experience whatsoever with digital art would have ever imagined that you could just basically tell a machine, I'd like to see Papa Smurf in the style of Soviet realism, throwing blueberries down to a field of screaming kittens, and it could happen. The machine could make that fucking happen. And so there's some room for error or something sometimes, but the fact that it could even get close and that it can succeed frequently, depending on which model you're using and stuff like that, is absolutely it's a total no way in hell I would have ever imagined that would have been happened. There's this kind of aspect of I guess when you look at it, having your mind blown by technology, the main thing is like if we all have sci-fi brain. We're like, if we're dorky enough, I suppose you're sitting back thinking like, oh, how am I going to imagine the future to be? And when the Black Destroyer, which is the story of the Coral, this like like monstrous alien that like steals the phosphorus in your bones, when that was written back in like the 30s or whatever, that story would have been ruined by the existence of security cameras. And it's like it's just really fucking funny that like this that you got like you put on your sci-fi brain, you think about what would happen. You might have been, I think you probably could have predicted the existence of security cameras in the 1920s. But but I like think out into the future and think like, oh, is looking at technology now, imagining what it might be capable of down the road. Do you think it would be possible for robots to do this? I never would have thought it, and it would never would have even crossed my mind. And then suddenly it existed, and I was just like, I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and so many horror movies have had to readjust to the existence of cell phones, which totally ruins the premise of many of their horrible events. So yeah,
Charles Charles Stross did an amazing article on his blog a couple of years ago about the difficulty of being a futurist science fiction writer when you're living in a technological landscape when, it catches up to you and surpasses you practically in real time. You can go, what if we had nuclear powered ship that could go under the water? And your readers are going,
that's madness. No, that can't happen.
the rate at which AI art generators has been improving is almost as shocking to me as the fact that they exist at all. I was looking the other day at my archive of stuff, and I've got some first generation AI art, which is pretty horrible, and it's now verging up on this bizarre, weird, fake photorealism.
Uh-huh.
I saw not to make this into the AI show, but yeah, I had a very similar experience. Like 1 minute, it seems like 1 minute. It was probably about 7 years. I saw like this guy I used to know, like playing with AI art, and it was like, Cracker Jack piracy is the prompt, and then like it produces something that looks kind of like the Cracker Jack motif mashed into a field of vague snow, and then maybe there's a tricorn hat over here, I'm not sure. And then like and then 2 years later, the first generation of like, main flight, like, like there was like Crayon, and then like a split second later there was Mid Journey's first generation. And then like it's only been a couple of years since that. It's just like when I saw that first generation of AI art, that like when it was at the level where like only like uber nerds with like a fancy computer rig that were like checking out the work that was being done by computer laboratories were doing anything with it. At that I saw some of that stuff, and it didn't even cross my mind this was going anywhere.
I
And
mean,
okay.
I can sort of, I can see how this is happening because what the computer is doing is it's gleaning bits and pieces from really good art, commercial art, good graphic artwork, and consolidating that into somehow into sort of the image you want. And just starting with that material means that they're going to be able to produce much better art than I could personally, that I don't have any of that talent. So it's like I'm piggybacking on all these other people who have spent years in art school and practicing and putting things together so nicely. And then I come along and I can type a few words into Midjourney or whatever and get that hard work bounce back to me.
You
However,
know, it's the way it's doing it is it has some similarities to the way that humans do it, but it is like I think Marcus was saying that the best way to look at this stuff is as an alien intelligence. It's doing it in a way that's like unprecedented and mathematical, and it's just like it's I don't know, it's a whole new kind of field of art, and there's a back at the one thing that's really ugly about this is it's reopened the big can of worms about like what is art, what is legitimate art. That's degenerate, that's terrible, that should be destroyed. And it's like there was a conceptual artist in the 70s, like or 60s or 70s, that had this sort of forbidden performance art where he said, I've got a really cool idea for an image or a painting or something in my head, and I'm never going to make it actually happen. You just have to trust that this is in my head. And he was like, so he's like walking around being all like, hey, hey, look at me. I got a good, cool idea. That was his art piece. Well, that guy could talk to a machine now and see if the machine could make it.
Yeah.
oh,
It's his real secret. The reason he was doing it is because he couldn't draw hands. which is really funny because we all dish all over the AIs because they can't draw hands. I mean, actually, they do very well now, but a year ago they couldn't do hands. Well, I can't do hands either. You
That's
know,
that's a that's a super common thing with art. It's like that's the thing that humans fail at. So it really shows you that even though it's an alien and it's approaching the issue from a like different kind of point of view, it is like it is suffering the same thing. The trickiest, fiddliest part of a human body is these, and like the humans trip up on it, then the AI trips up on it. Is repeating the same mistakes. Personally, the number of digits thing. I had that exact issue when I was like less than 5 years old drawing hands. I wouldn't know when to stop drawing fingers. I remember this. I had the exact same fucking problem. As I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, and you go back 50 or 60 years ago, and the comic book people were all drawing things with three fingers instead of four. So, it was the convention. And yeah, we've got famous comic book artists who can't even draw feet. So,
Oh
Rob
yeah.
Liefeld.
to PZ's point, the way I like to think of it is not that I'm able to use a couple commands and steal art and talent from this giant mass of history. I like to think of it as I'm able to take advantage of the sum total of human art to date, and that applies to written art, that applies to everything else. I'm not worried about the AIs becoming better writers than Shakespeare,
oh yeah.
because Shakespeare, I mean, Shakespeare he was great, but he stole all of his plots from Suetonius and Plutarch and stuff like that. All of the he was leveraging existing stuff. So I actually think we should just be really cheerful about it. I've been
Uh-huh.
listening to an audio book lately about Rudolf Diesel, the guy who invented diesel engines. Which, if you think about that, that's one of the biggest inventions in human history. And he grew up studying machines and drawing machines and obsessively sketching machines and looking at other people's machines. He quite openly and overtly took ideas from all of the engineers that had gone before. Here's how you make a camshaft, here's how you make a flat valve, and all this different stuff. So I think we should just kind of look at that and go, this is what we humans do. We started off in a cave somewhere scratching antelopes on the wall with pieces of ochre, and now we can turn to a computer and say, scratch me some antelopes and simulate it in the style of early Neanderthal, and it'll do it.
And it would all work out except for capitalism.
Yeah.
Because how are people
I
going to
this this
exercise
this
that
is a
art?
huge
Yeah.
element of things. Like I said, we didn't want this to be the AI art show, but like I've said 1,000 billion words on this on my blog. But yeah, if it wasn't for the idea of art as a living,
Uh,
the small people wouldn't feel as threatened. They would just be able to sit back and go like, well, damn, like but it's this idea that you're going to have an art job. That idea has been horse shit for like 100 years now, because of capitalism and exploitation and stuff like that. I don't know. But yeah, things that blew our minds, right? Things that blew our minds.
Well, me,
It blew
me,
Well,
mind
I've
blown.
got one that's related, but it's going to take a little bit of build up. So give me a minute or two to build onto it. Statistically speaking, there's an idea called a process. Essentially, it's sort of a mathematical model of some analogy to something real world. So, for instance, there's a thing called a Bernoulli process. Essentially, you turn a magic crank or something like that, and you get out a 0 or a 1. And which one you get out actually is based on some fixed probability and all that. Sounds kind of weird and alien, but this is actually sort of a mathematical model of the way coin flips work. You can actually sort of think of, okay, we can model that as a Bernoulli process and all that. And when you sort of pull it from the real world into the mathematical world, you can do some long-term analysis on it. Well, you can do a lot more than just that with processes. So, for instance, a Poisson process is something which, instead of emitting a 0 or 1 whenever you turn the crank, it emits a time interval. And that's how long it is between the start or the end or something like that. We can even get a little bit more crazy. Like in explaining this sort of thing, I've actually brought up the idea of a polynomial process. You turn your mythical crank and out pops a polynomial equation. Now, I mean, you can imagine there's a lot of different variants for what actually that could sort of be. So you can actually sort of put like constraints on it to say, okay, this sort of polynomial would be, frequently, it would be common in this sort of thing and all that. So you've actually sort of got like an arbitrary function generator, but with some additional parameters to sort of control how much it sort of goes on, on it, all that. And we can actually build up from that to bring up the idea of a Gaussian process. You take your, magical black box, you turn the crank, and out pops a multinomial Gaussian. And all that really sort of means is a Gaussian distribution, the whole bell curve and all that. But that's a distribution in one dimension. A multinomial is one which actually does it in an arbitrary number of dimensions. Now, these things are pretty awesome because you can actually work with infinite dimensional objects. You can literally just, have an arbitrary number of them, collapse them all down and all that. Really sort of, wild and cool to work with. It's actually quite hot, in certain statistical circles and all that. And you might be wondering, okay, why exactly am I talking about that right now, given we're talking about neural nets and all that? Well, a couple of decades ago, people proved that the Gaussian process is mathematically equivalent to what's known as sort of a single layer perceptron, i.e. a neural net, where every neuron is connected to each other, but there's only like one layer associated with it. Those two are mathematically equivalent. In fact, there's a more recent one in the last decade by a Google engineer, which claimed that the same is also true if you've got a multi-layer perceptron, i.e. you've got a neural network connected to itself, fully connected and all that. You've got multiple layers which are connected to each other and all that. They claim that, yes, this is also mathematically equivalent to a Gaussian process. So what you're really dealing with when it comes to neural networks and that is just sort of a function, essentially. You put in something in one side, you get something out the other side, and that's it. And that's really all neural networks are. The only thing that sort of makes them special or fancy in any way is it can do sort of arbitrary computation. If you go through enough training process and all that, you can actually just get it to do a function to do whatever you want, i.e. turn input text into output image. That's really all it is. It's just, a funky function with, all sorts of weird parameters and all that, which you can kind of go for that. Yeah, and that's a little bit mind-blowing.
Yes.
Yeah, once upon a time, I embarked on a project that got nowhere because I thought I had a really simple problem to solve, which was cutaneous sensory networks in these fish. And early in development, there's this small population of neurons. They send out axons that grow and branch over the surface of the skin. And the whole point of this is you want to get uniform coverage. You don't want any big, huge gaps. It's inefficient if you get big piles of them clumping together. And so I was working with simulations for a while, modeling all this from a biological perspective. It's not like you can plan what you're going to do. Everything it's going to respond to its environment. So how do you design a growth cone from the nervous system to recognize when there's an empty patch near it or when there's one that's overcrowded? And all you can do is looking around in your immediate neighborhood. So I could model things like they've got these Philopodia that reach out like little antennae for a certain distance. They feel what's there. And I tried and tried, and I could not get it to work. The fish were smarter than I was because I was trying to get them to make these nice, elegant networks that are, based on random distributions. So it's not like they're machine-like regular patterns. It's just kind of random. And it turned out that was really, really hard to get the things to do that. They just would not, no matter what I did, I would get clumps and I would get holes, and it didn't look anything like the fish because I had all these specimens of fish embryos where I'd stained them and I could compare those to what the computer was turning out.
That's that Ian Malcolm shit, that chaos theory, Jurassic Park. It's all happening,
Yeah,
man.
Well,
I could introduce the chaos, but I couldn't get the regularity out of it.
what you're doing is you're modeling the actual systems. If you sit down and you spend a lot of time thinking about the actual system and then making a model that functions sort of like that. And that's how all of the progress in AI stuff that we're seeing lately
Right.
has functioned is you go, well, if I drew a I'm a terrible artist, which is why I like the AIs. If you put a gun to my head and told me to draw a stick figure, I might be able to do it. But if I drew a stick figure and I was going to publish it, I would show it to several people and go, do you think this is good or not? You've just developed an adversarial network where you've got something that creates 6 different stick figures, and then you send it to some experts. And matching things is real easy. So you train another neural network on what is the great art versus the schlock art, and then you take your designs and you apply the neural network on the output of the first one. And if you do this in multiple cascades in all different directions very, very fast, it comes out nice-ish.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get too many fingers.
Right. But and also the thing is, even if you made your output perfect, that's not what art looks like.
Right?
Yeah, you would get, if every time you ran your program to create great art, it just spat out the Mona Lisa over and over and over again. Uh, that's not successful. You got to have something more tinkering in the background and changing things.
I don't know. I don't know. Again, like this is you get into the whole like what is art debate. I guess that would be another thing that kind of blow my mind recently is that like 100 years after Marcel Duchamp did his ready-mades with the Armut thing with the urinal and whatnot, like his point is still has to be made over and over and over again. That's kind of mind blowing the way humans kind of reiterate. I don't know. Maybe recently. I mean, it shouldn't be. I mean, this has happened before, like so many times. We just have to keep like reiterating the same discussions for ever until the end of the universe. I'm just like lately I've been like kind of like really seeing the repetitions within history, not in that whole like people used to always say when I was growing up, oh, history repeats itself or whatever. And so it's like, uh why does it have to be like that? We like literally have the intelligence to like as a arbitrary human spit out at random with the right knowledge could potentially make reasonable decisions, right? So why in mass is it always the goddamn same stupid problem? Like the some asshole with like with sufficiently aberrant mind is all just like, hey, I can get people to give me power or money by telling them to hate somebody else, and then it just like it works every fucking time, like it just without fail. Like the anti-vaxxing would, if we destroyed anti-vaxxing completely, it would emerge de novo from the baseline like human pigeon brain, because like it's like I don't like negative stimulus of getting poked. Therefore somebody could tell me, hey, you're right to not like that because scary thing, and then, oh, I better trust this guy and give him money. Like I don't see his profit motive, but I do see the profit motive of big pharma because he uses because blah blah whatever. And it's like Andrew Wakefield lives in a mansion. Does the person that like invented the mRNA vaccine live in a mansion? Like, yeah, his CEO does, but it's like, it's just
Well,
the same shit, different day, man.
I'm pretty sure that they're living comfortable lives, that they're
So
yeah, they got nice homes. They're not billionaires, but then nobody should be billionaires, but they're doing well enough because
Especially pharma CEOs, fuck those guys.
yeah,
But like this joke dipshit in the Walmart break room who is like just like every fucking week telling you like like yeah, don't trust doctors, like eat more fucking vitamin C, like like if you got cancer or broken ribs. I just I don't know, human beings are kind of fucking astonishing. That blows my mind in a bad
what
way.
Here's why all of this stuff happens. I know this is going to sound like that's a very broad claim, but the reason that it happens, the reason we fight over art, the reason we fight over vaccines is because it's important to us. Art is actually, to some people, it's a matter of life and death. And really that's what we're seeing, is we're seeing that emotional reaction to the obvious fact that a bunch of software can do art pretty well. I'm not hurt by it because my living doesn't depend on doing art, and I've never identified myself as a good artist. I imagine it must be incredibly painful to someone who spent their whole life developing art skills, and then this AI comes along and goes, "That's nice."
I have to admit, I might have had a pretty different reaction to this coming straight out of art school. I was like, I was doing an art hobo with my fucking tin can on the corner, like, like talking to, like, doing like, oh, here, do caricatures for a kid's party, make less than enough money to pay for rent for 1 month. See if you can string together enough of those fucking gigs. Like, yeah, I might have felt a little bit different about it. That said, I think AI art is really revealing a lot about every aspect of this thing, this whole fucking game. One thing is that, like, it looks very much like the default art style that people converged on through natural processes of
Yeah.
social interaction on shit like ArtStation and stuff like that, because it was fed on ArtStation and stuff like that, right? So it's got like it's the default style. Like, if you're not putting, like, saying I want this in the style of Gauguin, but with colors more like Henry Darger and, like, like Smurfs or whatever, right? If you're not doing that sort of stuff to it, the default art style that it spits out is the same as the people on that used to be able to impress a lot on, like, CG Talk, ArtStation, DeviantArt, or whatever. We'd all look up, all this newbie artists would look at those guys and go like, "Wow, why am I even fucking trying?" I felt like that a lot in high, because I came from being pretty hot shit in my high school to being like warm shit in college, to like seeing that stuff on the internet and going like, I am nothing, right? And now that style is nothing, because that is the style people psychologically associate with AI. So it's like, and then I'm like, you know what? That style never was anything. It was just a style. It's an option. You could do anything with art. And why did that look so fucking cool to me once upon a time? It's and if it wasn't for this whole weird shit happening right now, like, that wouldn't, I don't know if I would have, like, ever picked up on that. I would have just always thought of myself as being like not that great of an artist. But I'm like, you know, I art can be anything. You don't have to. If XKCD is the fucking isn't even great at stick figures, right? But it's the context, and nobody would shit on XKCD that was worth anything, right? So,
Well, it's the same kind of thing with writing. I don't think that any educated writer has ever come out of the gate and said, "I am going to top Shakespeare." Right? You don't do that. You just try to be better than some random Mill SF author. And that's really the issue, because the AIs can do a better job of John Ringo than John Ringo can do.
Oh, yeah.
So the people who are going to be threatened by all this stuff are the John Ringos, or the self-identified military SF mediocrities. They're not going to compete. They're not going to compete with Shakespeare. Not that I actually think Shakespeare's that great. It's kind of hard to read, but anyway.
Yeah, no, I occasionally download some things from Kindle Unlimited, which is just this cauldron of mediocrity that goes on and on and on. And you can tell that there are people there who are churning out novels every day and putting them on Kindle Unlimited. And when you look at them, yeah, you can see this is trash. This is just rehashing old tropes over and over again, following a style that somebody else has
and
pioneered.
and if it was specifically made by AI, it's probably also making it less edgy and more banal and polite, and
Right.
involving bullet pointed lists.
Man, I was just gonna argue that, Alexandre Dumas, that's what he did. People said that about him at the time when he was writing the Three Musketeers. It's just you slap together some historical context around some sword fight and some risky bedroom scenes, and that's it.
Yeah,
It's not that nothing is new. It's that breaking out of this framework of our civilization is the hard part, and we keep expecting AIs to do that, and they're not going to do that. I got into the argument about this the other day with alcohol was involved, and the guy was going, well, AI is never going to invent a new form of art like Pablo Picasso did. And I let this guy go on for 15 minutes, and I said, Picasso didn't invent cubism.
right.
Oh, that was fun.
Yeah, I mean, another side of it too is, I was down on these Kindle Unlimited crap novels that get churned out, but writing stuff over and over again and just exercising those skills, not involving AI at all, but just doing it and doing it and doing it is how you make good authors. And so Alexandre Dumas is a good example. His books are very entertaining. They're great books. And he was doing this, I don't know what the rate was, but penny a word hacks that he published in newspapers and magazines and serialize them and go on and on. But that's how you build authorship is you just got to do it. I've been telling my students for many, many years, that's what you got to do. You're supposed to write this term paper and just go in every day and hammer out a couple of paragraphs, a couple of pages, just keep piling them up. And that gives us something to discuss. And then we can talk about shaping the raw clay of your writing into
Something that blew
something
my
better.
mind pretty recently. Something else that blew my mind recently is took this job where I talk with people every freaking day about trying to help, and I'm trying to educate people every day. I have to try to explain laws and policies to people in ways they can understand, and also technical things like how to get on such and such website or whatever. And I'm really coming to the conclusion that that the average human being has holes in their cognition that nobody is freaking copying to. Nobody's registering. Sometimes it's actually it's something that affects the way they treat others, because it's something like, oh, they got empathy to an extent, but then there's some kind of weird blind spot in it that isn't even necessarily like a bias like racism or whatever, but it's just literally some function of the brain that the median human has, but this random person doesn't have. There are holes like that in the thinking abilities of almost anybody.
Yeah.
I don't know what my limits are, but I'm not really interested in finding out. I know I'm going to run into them. I know I'm going to do it one of these days. And AI does offer the possibility of for all these people, these fucking scientists that are shit at writing, they're okay, I'm gonna have AI write my my the what do they call that? The abstract, right?
Yeah.
And if maybe this guy did great work on the rest of the paper, well, if he's got the kind of ethics to use AI on the abstract, he probably didn't. But let's say this theoretically, there's a guy who's really great at doing science, the hard lay work of science, really rigorous and stuff, but he's just paralyzed when it comes to writing, has a big hole in his cognition about that. So he decides, oh, this new technology came along, maybe this can do this for me and stuff like that. Well, I hope he figures out how to start double check to make sure it doesn't have the bullet points and the little oh, this is you should double check this work, blah blah warning in it, but I just man, I don't know. The other thing too is that in my experience with writing is that something that was super liberating for me was going in terms of being able to just get started was being willing to write badly.
Yeah.
This is a skill that I particularly developed as game master, is doing it in web-based form, so it's in text, is to just be the narrator of the universe uses the word y'all and says, and then they just kind of did some shit over here, occasionally stuff like that. And being able to do that stuff was a transferable skill to trying to first draft novels, which I'd never achieved before. So like sometimes writing badly is your step for like getting moving and improving. But I'm just like yeah, in terms of the mind-blowing thing that was making me think of is just like I can't there's given this, I don't think that if you're trying to be anti-ableist, and I'm trying to be more scrupulously anti-ableist than the average person, what is it? What do you do when a person has a disability? You accommodate them. You figure out how to work with that. Um, if we can start to figure out like what people are missing, if without judgment, if we can actually like look at the people that are fucked up in some way, that like messed up in some way, and like without and reserve judgment on that and just be all like, where did you go wrong here and what can we do about that? And don't assume that education is going to fix this. Go like, maybe this person actually just straight up can't fucking do that, right? In which case, like, how do you accommodate them? I mean,
Yeah.
it's like you kind of tempting to take away their goddamn voting rights if they like, like can't help but be like, I murder puppies and stuff like that. But I don't, is that the solution? I don't know. I'm also having my mind constantly blown by how much there's no good solutions for almost any of our problems.
Yeah. We're all atheists or atheistic adjacent or agnostics or whatever here. And one of the things that kind of has blown my mind is I have tried listening seriously to Christian apologists. And it's amazing how bad their arguments are. Even the ones who are applying logical syllogisms to things, they don't even understand what their syllogism says. And you know, if I were back in the business of arguing with these people, I would just throw up my hands in frustration because what you just said is absurd, illogical, irrational, doesn't work.
So,
But
so that's one of the frustrations I have in life, and my solution to that has been to throw up my hands. But basically, I need to have a cognitive framework to hang that throwing up my hands of on. And my framework has been this: uh, it's all every bit of reasoning that exists is motivated reasoning. Everybody who has any kind of position whatsoever is basically following their biases, and even if those biases happen to be right, it's a coincidence. Your reasoning is as motivated as theirs. Maybe I'm
yeah.
wrong, but that's just like
Well,
my
one of my solutions to dealing with this right now is I just say bugger logic. No, logic is not how you're going to figure things out. That I'm a hardcore empiricist. What you got to do is go out and get data to test your stuff, and coming up with more and more elaborate rationalizations for what you want to believe is a dead end. And that makes it really frustrating to listen to these debates and things on YouTube. There's lots of atheists who are always arguing there. And I just want to say the logic doesn't matter. Your opponent is not using logic.
Well,
Think of a better way.
it's worse than that. If you were arguing with me and you said something that was obviously wrong, and I pointed out that it was obviously wrong, you, as a scientist, would not make that argument again. You'd be talking to somebody else and you'd make a different argument that might be wrong or that might be right, but you wouldn't be trotting out the same stupid apologetics for 2,000 years. That's what these guys are doing.
Yes, I have heard the Kalam cosmological argument so many times, and it doesn't work. It doesn't do what they say it would. But yeah, also the thing is, if you said something I said was wrong, I would ask you, how is it wrong? Explain it to me. Tell me what I've done wrong here. And I would then try to incorporate that reasoning into what I was thinking. So yeah, if we're arguing about the existence of God and you came up with some novel, clever thing that's provided evidence for it, um, I would stop and I would say, wow, that's interesting. I'm going to have to go look up that stuff and see what's going on there. But they don't do that. They've already got their conclusion. They're not going to change.
Oh yeah, I agreed. I mean, I long ago sort of concluded that deities. If you're arguing about deities and all that when it comes to religion, you're not focused on the right place. It's got, religion has nothing to do with that. It's got everything to do with people. And people using these things to justify their behavior, to either get themselves an advantage in life, to get ahead, to make friendships or whatever.
Get
You know,
laid.
yeah, that too. Just if you're studying religion and you're focused on, the beliefs, you're looking in the wrong spot.
Yes.
It's just
Yes. And looking at the logic is even worse because there is no logic behind these religious beliefs. That's why I always retreat to empiricism. Let's go look at some data. Let's do some experiments. Let's test that.
Who's the
And
big empiricist? And was that Hume? Somebody here knows.
Hume
I
was
think
the
you're
empiricist. Yep.
Yeah, okay.
mhm.
And also
I'd call
Pierce.
Descartes the big rationalist, the one that was all like, I
Yeah.
have to assume that everything I can observe is wrong, therefore I'm going to proceed from reason alone. And that was like, that guy was really, really, really good, actually. I think he was super sharp.
Mhm.
However, like his pièce de résistance had flaws that a fucking 10-year-old who's thinking clearly can see through
Right.
because it was motivated reasoning. It's
Yep.
so is that. And I think you almost certainly could have motivated empiricism.
Oh, we do. There's
Oh yeah.
lots of people who do that.
Black
Yeah.
Crime Watch.
Yeah.
Mhm. Oh god, yeah. This gets into epistemology, and I could easily fill an hour with like an argument on science and the logic underpinning it and all that. And yeah, it's not nearly as strong as most people believe. Sorry about that.
Yeah. And I hate to say it, but we are at an hour and 8 minutes. We should be winding things
Hey,
up.
did you blow our minds yet, PZ?
No, I didn't. I
Uh,
failed.
Blow our
Um,
minds one time. Like we got pigeons from Hornbeck. We got like naledi and uh what else was it from random
Uh, herpes.
yeah.
herpes. Yeah, like
Mhm.
and dementia. And then like and then I was like, oh, AI and stuff.
Right. Yeah.
What do you got? What blew your mind?
Well, at first I got to preface this by saying that there aren't many things that are notable that blow my mind. And it's not because I know everything. It's because I am so used to every day opening up a journal and reading an article and discovering something I never thought of before. And so the mind-blowing business has gotten routine. I'm jaded about having my mind blown. Uh, so that's one thing. But I can also say that, there are things where I have historically been really blown away. For instance, when I started graduate school and I was learning about the kinds of experiments I could do, and I was really interested in development and genetics, and people started talking about this stuff these crazy people in Germany are doing, Nusslein, Volhard, and Wieschaus, and all that. And then I learned they had to look at 1 million embryos, and I just said, "Wait a minute, I'm a first year graduate student. I am not prepared for this." And then they published a paper that just boom blew my mind. It was a paper on the genes involved in early segmentation in flies, and it basically set up the whole field of Evo Devo. It was just one paper that showed the way. And
What was that the Hawks genes thing with the
Yeah.
fruit
no,
flies?
they weren't looking at, this wasn't the Hox genes paper. This was
Oh,
the earlier stuff where they were looking at determinants for forming segments, without worrying about the identity genes yet. And they were Nusslein Volhard was famous for the toll receptors, discovering those, which are they're often dorsal ventral patterning genes. And then now it turns out that they're involved in all kinds of processes in cancer and everything. Everything links together. So that was a mind-blowing moment for me, they hit me with that in my first year of graduate school, and just how am I going to keep up? And I didn't. I just did my stuff and kept plodding along. So yeah, that was kind of a mind-blowing event. And like I say, that every time I open a journal, you read a paper and there's something you didn't think of that somebody thought about and did an experiment or made an observation. and suddenly you're enlightened and you start thinking about everything in this subtly different way, and it just piles up until you're some old 67-year-old weirdo who's got all kinds of crazy ideas in his head. Okay. Does that satisfy your need? We should.
Yeah.
Mind's
Okay.
blown.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah. There's so much to blow our minds out there if you're just open to learning about it. So, okay, is that a good place to stop?
Hmm.
Oh, I should look at the comments. Are there comments?
It hasn't been too bad. I've been popping into the comment section a little bit to
Okay.
respond to things as necessary.
Okay, good. Yeah. Well, I think we'll close it there and I will stop and we'll shut this off. Bye, everybody. Thanks for dropping by. Uh, all 74 people. And we'll see you next month. And right now, before everyone leaves, we will talk about what we should discuss next month. So, good night,
Okay.
everyone.
Good night, all.
Okay, there it's over.